Hello and welcome to this session on motivations for intergenerational giving. We are TENS, the Episcopal Network for Stewardship, and among the many things we do, providing annual campaign resources for your congregation, we also engage in training and teaching and education to help you develop these skills, refine these skills, and be able to teach them to others. We teach you so that you can keep this learning going in your congregations, in your deaneries, in your dioceses. The more folks we have knowing this information, the better. So I'm so happy that you are with us today. I am joined by my good friend, Dina Van Claveren, who introduced herself just a couple minutes ago, but now we're recording. So I will say again, thank you, Dina, for being with us and for joining me on this incredible adventure through the motivations for intergenerational giving. I want to go over a couple of the learning objectives for today. We're going to be talking about different approaches for different generations. One of the things I want to stress as we move through this is that our stewardship, our pledge campaigns, our fundraising efforts can't be a one size fits all or a one age fits all model. We have many different generations alive and giving of their time, talent, and treasure in church right now. And they don't all respond to the message in the same way. And they're not all motivated in the same way. So today we're going to be going over some general ways in which our many generations interact with the message of church and the message of how the church gets funded, so that you can learn how to tailor your approach when it comes time to asking people to show their generosity and demonstrate that. We're also going to be spending quite a bit of time on what we need to know about younger generations, and more than that, what the church needs to learn so that we can be open to younger generations. We need to do some changing here in the church, and we're going to talk a lot about some models for that and some things that will help you in your ministry engage with some of the younger generations. And finally, we're going to talk about some giving tips, how to make certain that you are asking for the full range of gifts that people have available. It's not just checks and cash any longer. People give through a variety of means. And we're going to go over some of those and make sure that your pledge cards do more than just ask people to wait for the plate to come by or write a check. So we'll be talking about all of those things today. Again, you have lots of opportunity to ask questions. If something sparks your mind while we're talking today, please type it into the chat and we'll go through that every once in a while. Dina and I are going to be moving through our slides together, kind of switching off every once in a while, so you'll get lots of voices, I hope. All right, let's dig in. So we are at an amazing time in the life of the church. And in 2022, through the miracles of modern medicine and longevity in general, we have more generations alive, participating, giving in church than we've ever had at any other time in history. There are 5 generations who are all able to make gifts of time, talent, and treasure to their churches right now. This is a great thing, but it means that we have to think about the very different ways that these generations have been formed in their own culture by what is around them and appeal to them to make sure that we are sending the right message and that they're receiving the message that we send to them. So this is a great time for the church. There are people volunteering and giving who are just in high school and who are retired and everything in between. This is an amazing time to be alive in the church. And we need to learn how to accommodate all of our generations. So we're going to take a little look here through the different generations. And I apologize that these are broad brushstrokes. We know we can't encapsulate every single individual in these broad generalizations, but we're going to give you some overall demographics for how these generations interact with our church. We're going to start with our mature generation. Dina, that's you. There you go.
All right. And my internet was going in and out, but I think I'm good, right? We're good? Excellent. All right. So I want to talk a little bit about this generation. I asked Davey if I could have the matures because they are some of my favorite human beings on the planet, are matures, including my parents. And so I want to talk about this group. This is, of course, the group that is born before 1945. This is our oldest generation, our wisdom holders right now, and our elders that have really kept the church going and stable and steady for the rest of us to participate in it. So this is a community that deserves honor and gratitude. Now, 60% of people in this matures category of the whole group of the matures donate to a church, to their religious community, and 51% volunteer with a church. If you are in a congregation that has a lot of matures, then you can see what an asset that is, that your donation levels will be at 60% or more, probably, and a lot of volunteerism. One of the challenges I think for matures, as a pastor, I notice is when they're not able to volunteer at the level they would like, that becomes difficult for them because that's such a source of joy as they contribute by volunteering. So they are very interested in supporting the institution because they trust the institution. These are folks who are typically joiners, who join different organizations and institutions throughout their lives, and they trust the role of the church in the community. They rely on us for pastoral care, especially as they are aging and making decisions about where they will live and healthcare and certain things like that. And they are very interested in the church being there for them and future generations. So you might hear some of the matures say, you know, I'm really worried that the church is not going to survive because we don't have enough young people. That is a source of grief or sadness. They might grieve if their own younger family members are not active at church. And they very much are concerned if the church will be there for them as they age. And several folks in this age group have talked to me about wanting to be sure that they are able to have their funeral in their church. And they're concerned about the well-being and survival of their congregation to that point, which I understand. And so this is a group that when we talk about stewardship and giving, they may be more interested or more inclined to talk at this point about making planned gifts or for capital projects, as well as annual giving. A lot of folks do not know what tomorrow holds when you are in an age group born before 1945. You're in your late 70s and on up, and you're not sure what care needs you're going to have. And with an increasing care costs for folks moving into assisted living and other situations, they want to make sure that they've got the resources so that they are not a burden to their family or others. So they may not be able to really increase annual giving, even if they have the money in the bank. They may be more inclined to do planned gifts, knowing that they can leave a real legacy after they no longer need those funds to care for themselves. So that's something to consider when you're talking with matures about stewardship. It's more likely that planned giving will produce results rather than an increase in annual giving, pledged giving. What do you want to add to that, Davey? What'd I miss?
You didn't miss a thing, but I realize that we are blessed on this call to have Charles Cluin Jr. Joining us from Maryland. And he's the planned giving guy. I sort of want to be Charles when I grow up one day. So Charles, I'm wondering if you would be willing to say a couple of things about planned giving and estate planning.
Hi, I'm Charles Cluin. I'm 80 years old. So
All
I am
right.
in this generation. I think the key thing is to remind people and give them the opportunity. I believe every congregation should have a legacy society. If you can afford a cake, you can afford a legacy society. Here at the Cathedral of the Incarnation, where I'm planned giving officer, on the fourth Sunday of Lent every year, except for the 2 COVID years, this past fourth Sunday of Lent, we had a big half a sheet cake in Growl's Supermarket, the best cakes in Maryland, I think. And in Thanksgiving for our Legacy Society, we had all their names on the front page of the bulletin. There were 27 names plus 8 anonymous, and we celebrated that. And we gave people the opportunity to make a gift in their planned giving. The thing to remember today, and this is true of younger generations as well, is the retirement accounts. To redo a will means going to a lawyer and spending money. To include the church in a retirement account costs nothing. You call up the provider, you say, please send me a new form and do a percent. And I always recommend percentages because, as Dina so well said, people in my generation worry about how much we have when we die. If I die right now, I think there'll be a pretty good estate. If I spend 5 years in a nursing home, there'll probably be nothing. So what I recommend is percentages. In my own family, I've got 2 children, 2 stepchildren, we're each getting 20% of my estate. That's retirement funds as well as my dollar amounts. And then 5% is going to Hobart College, 5% is going to Berkeley Divinity School at Yale, 5% is going to American Friends, Episcopal Diocese of Jerusalem, and 5% is going to St. Francis Church, where I was rector there for 18 years. So that's why I witnessed that as a way, and people hear that and say, yes, my children don't need it all. And that's the thing to remember. Usually in most cases for seniors, their children don't need it all. They're making more money than they are. Of course, they're working and retired, so that's being different. So those are my thoughts. And also on the pledge card, you have a check off. I remember the church in my estate plans. That way you've got a group of people to get together for a plan giving task force. And second, you have a check off, please send me information. They check that off, please, please, please follow up on it. And if you need resources, the Episcopal Church Foundation has incredible resources that are basically free. Thank you.
I want to thank Charles, who's taught me also to say thank you, thank you, thank you 3 times, and to have those forms ready with the plan giving information. I did learn from TENS to have that checkbox on the pledge card, and Charles gave me all the planned giving paperwork for a legacy society when he came to our parish years ago. So that's a real gift, and that is something you can just have at the ready when people are interested.
Thank you. And thank you, Charles. Always love to have you on one of these webinars. TENS will be doing an entire session in October on planned giving and estate giving, how to reinvigorate your legacy society, and some tips. So you can sign up for that on our webinar website. I'll send the link out today to make sure you can do that. Always want to be talking about planned giving. Let's talk about some of our other generations too. Let's talk about those boomers. We hear so much about them, and this is an important generation as well. Some of them are beginning to enter retirement. Some of them are at the very end of their career, making some of their best salaries. So this is a really strategic generation to look at when we think about giving and when we think about how our church's needs can be funded. So this generation, they give a little less to church, or I should say, fewer of them give to church than the mature generation. You'll notice it's a big difference in that generation. So 48%, right around half, donate to a religious institution, and about the same number volunteer with a church. So this is really important. As we know, any of us who work in church and we have an event, it's this group that shows up ready to roll up their sleeves and work, or contribute their ideas, serve on councils and task forces and committees, the way Episcopal Church likes to work, and make sure these are doers. This is a generation of doers. So while we saw in our mature generation that there's high trust for institution, this generation has a little bit more skepticism. They'd like to see a bit of the finances, maybe open the books before they decide, or they want to see that report from the treasurer. They pay more attention to it than the rest of us might. They want to learn about that. They want to understand what's happening behind the scenes. They are, in fact, very concerned about the church being there for them. Maybe they are the group of folks whose children left in their teen years and their college years and are starting to come back now as they're having children. They want to make sure that the church will be there for their grandchildren, for their great-grandchildren. And so this is a generation that's really interested in the future as well. Because of where they sit in their careers, they may be living on retirement assets by now. And so they might not be able to increase their annual giving. They might be maxed out for what you can expect from them year after year. But they might still be very interested in talking about capital giving, again, because they want the church to be there in the future. And of course, if this group hasn't signed up for planned giving, we really need to talk about their appreciated assets. They're probably sitting on portfolios, on houses, on retirement accounts that have appreciated greatly. And so rather than send all that money off to the government and taxes, there are ways that great planned giving programs can help them now and later defray those appreciated and capital gains. So this is a group to talk about planned giving for sure. Please make sure that that you're doing that. This is the wealthiest generation ever to have lived. Yeah, we have great examples before in the Gilded Age of robber barons and things like that, but we had, as we have now still, great income inequality, but it was even greater in other times. And so this generation has incredible wealth. We're going to see in the next slide how that's going to play out in the succeeding generations. Dina and I are proud to be Gen Xers, that lost generation, the skeptics, the duck and cover generation, whatever you'd like to call us. We are those kids, born between 65 and 76. In general, not a whole lot of us go to church and not a whole lot of us give to church. So there it is, under 40%. But now look at the statistic of how many of us volunteer in church. We're going to start to see this inverse as the generations get younger. More of us will volunteer with church outreach programs. So that's to say a tutoring program, an after-school program, a feeding program, a community cleanup. Those kinds of things might attract us as a generation, whether or not we are members of the church. The churches are community focused. We want to act locally. And so this is a generation that will show up if you ask them to join your church cleanup day or your river rescue or help give food or clothing away to a mission program or something like that. So please be thinking of volunteers for this generation. In some succeeding slides, we're going to talk more about the power and the need to cultivate volunteers and how that can lead to good discipleship and good donation practices. So again, this generation more interested in volunteering first, maybe is a little like, get your feet wet. Let's see what this place is all about. They may not ever convert to members, but they may be some of your most loyal volunteers. They might also make financial gifts to support your outreach ministry, which might be separate from wanting to fund your budget. They may never care about what happens in your church. They might just be focused on what you're doing outside and want to support that. We as a church need to find ways to make certain that people can make gifts without feeling like we need to enroll them in a membership program. If they just want to fund our ministry, of course, I mean, we're always looking to grow, and we will make that evangelism effort to them. But it might not sell to everyone. So let's find ways as church to accept all the gifts that this generation wants to give in the way they want to give them. Dina and I and our generation, we are less trusting of the institution even than our boomer compatriots. We have seen the scandals. We watched Enron, we watched government collapse. The very first thing in my baby book that my mom saved for me, a headline, was Nixon resigns. She wanted me to understand like the great implication that was happening with the government falling and a change happening. She thought this was momentous. And in fact, I'm a generation that has grown up not trusting our politicians in the same way, not trusting some of our venerable institutions in the same way. We are right now, this generation, making our best salaries. We are working well in our careers. We are at that place where we're probably making our highest salary. And so please lean on this generation for great annual gifts. We should be asking them to make a good gift, to increase every year, to think about it, even though they have costs that are going up. We want to make sure that these folks are sharing their income with us. Capital gifts as well. So funding the future of the church, helping put that new roof on, or endowing a youth minister or something like that. This generation will respond well to that call. We're about to inherit $40 trillion from our grandparents and our parents. This is an incredible amount of money that this generation is going to be entrusted with. And church needs to understand right now how to handle that, how to make it possible for people to share the wealth that they will get, and create tax-free ways of giving, create programs that appeal to folks who might be flush with some new money and want to contribute to worthy causes that are community-based. Again, we need to always sell our Christian message of evangelism and hope, and also prove that we are helping our communities. This is really important to locking in giving from our Gen X folks. And Dina's going to take us into our last two generations.
And when you talked about institutional lack of trust, and I thought I saw Tammy Baker's mascara running down her face as you said that. That was a very vivid memory of mine growing up and all that was going on in the church. So now we get into the millennials, and I was just at a plant sale this morning at Redeemer Episcopal Church in Baltimore, and I was, cheek by jowl with some millennials, and I was aware that one of them, and I love this generation. I was a summer camp director, and many of the camp counselors are in the millennial age group. Just love this age group. Worked with them as a college administrator as well. This younger man next to me said, I'm really overwhelmed by all these native plants. I'm just overwhelmed. Can somebody help me? And I thought, well, that's very millennial. He's got his phone out. He's trying to figure out what's going on. He wants all the information. So this is a very different group than Davey and I in Gen X. So the millennials, they started being born in 77 all the way up to 95. And you see that inverse piece, but a dip in really both areas here, how much they donate to a church and how much they volunteer to a church. Many of them were not introduced to church or did not really know about church, and it may not be their primary kind of identification in the community that's waning with this group. The millennials are most interested in results. They want to see action. They want to see what's happening out in the world, and this is really an opportunity for us to consider, John De Beers wrote about this in some EFM work, if anybody out there is in EFM, talking about being a public church. The millennials care if we are a public facing church. They care if we are connecting with our neighbors who are right there in the community. And so that plant sale was the perfect place to see millennial after millennial with their credit card and their Venmo and buying lots and lots of native plants. They are less organized. They are very organized, I'm sure, but they're less trusting in organizations and institutions. They may just be less aware of the role of the church. And they need easy access to making donations to things that really matter to them, things that will align with their values, which can be a lot of advocacy work or justice pieces. And you can see that they're really generous to nonprofits. 89% of this generation is making donations, probably on their phones or through their computers, to nonprofits that are not the church. And so that is going to be a sign to us that the generosity is there, the impulse is there, and we can be ready to help them understand that the church is a nonprofit doing really great work in the community that they can also tap into. And I'm really proud of St. Paul's Poplar Springs. I started working with them in the fall. Right away, they set up several Vanco sites. And one of those Vanco sites is tied into an actual ministry in the community to welcome Afghan refugees, which was all over the news in September when that Vanco link went up. And because I'm in the Gen X group, I put that all on Facebook as soon as I could with a link for giving. And, you know, there's another person out there that went and bought a car seat that's a millennial, because that's very tangible. They could go buy the car seat we needed for the family and give that to the church to use. And that online presence has made a big difference, I think, in capturing those millennial generosity impulses. The next slide should take us into the group that my children are in. What's that?
Before we go to the next slide, I wanted to brag on you a little bit about this plant sale and remind all of our viewers that Dina is a master gardener.
I am newly minted.
Minted master gardener.
I'm also I am the new owner of 4 pawpaw trees, which is a native tree in Maryland that I really can hardly focus this morning. I'm so excited about my pawpaw trees.
All right.
Thank you, Davey. That was very nice.
Thank you.
And so, you know, and I think, yeah, absolutely. I think anything that we do for the environment and anything that we do around theology for the environment is going to capture the interest of both of these generational groups. Generation Z and millennials, they are looking at the situation around them like, what have you guys done? And to see older generations care about what's happening to the earth and act in the community, make changes, planting trees, cleaning up watersheds, it's really going to grab this group in terms of volunteering and funding. So this group is born 1996 and later. By 20 years old, 30% have made a donation to a nonprofit. This group is really their sense of justice. You know, they are coming of age at a time of great reckoning around the racism in this country and other inequalities. They are very accepting of people that are different from themselves and their own cultural backgrounds. They are digital natives and they get online quickly to learn what they want to learn about things. They're voracious readers, at least online. And 97% of this generation has made an online gift for a charitable purpose. So this is, if we're going to reach Generation Z, it's going to be online. We just have to get those online giving systems up. It's a hassle. I'll just acknowledge it's a hassle for the church to figure out how to do that, process that, and transition. And it's going to be worth it because this is where the future generations are going to give, or how they're going to give. They want their work to make a difference. So they need to see a church is making a difference. They do not just want to be associated with a church to feel like good people. They want to do good work with their church. 76% are worried about the planet and want to see that their congregation and their local church communities are engaged in that work. And so even that native plant sale, seeing that trees are going in, inviting people to come and plant, clean up, would really grab these folks. And then you can work with them one-on-one and really get to create those relationships that might draw them into church. So prefer apps and mobile giving. You know, both of my children have checking accounts. They are 16 and 19. And they have to be reminded every time they write a check how to do it. They just don't do it. It's not going to be how they do their financial, how they manage their financial life. They do it all through Venmo and other resources online. And so they have checks, but I dare to say they hardly use them. And when asked, they will give, but I bet they're going to have some questions about what they're giving to and for. And so we may need to revamp some of our ways of articulating what generous giving does to transform the community. So this group makes up 40% of all customers out there in the mix, not just in church customers, but customers out in businesses. That's incredible buying power. And so again, something like a plant sale, they're going to come in and drop a lot of money on a native plant sale, and you'll get to know them that way, hopefully. I want to share, I think I'll go ahead and share this. So we have a high schooler that's not my daughter, another young woman in our congregation in Gen Z, that because of our youth group, she was at the house blessing for the Afghan ministry. She sent me a text this week that the Key Club at the local high school, those kids in the Key Club, they took kind of an offering, or they gathered resources, and they've got over $100 that some teenagers in the local high school want to give for that family. Now, they want to buy something. They don't want to give cash. And that's part of that, a little bit of institutional, they're not sure about that. Ava is, but maybe the others aren't. And so we're going to go shopping with the family so these young people can see that their generosity is going to make a difference in the lives of this refugee family. And they are really excited about that. Of course, parents will be coming along because some of those young people do not drive. And that's a discipleship evangelism moment to let them buy things for this family that the family needs, while I'm hanging back and talking with the parents about how cool it is that they're helping welcome them into the larger community. So that's the kind of thing where we need to merge our volunteerism and our generous giving for this generation.
That's such an inspiring story, Dina, because you're absolutely right. It captures the spirit of a generation wanting to give, not wanting to send money to something, but wanting to roll up the sleeves, see this happen. And what a generous gift for this group of high schoolers to create and come up with on their own and decide that this is what they wanted to do. I love that story. That sounds like church.
Yeah, thanks, Davey. That sounds like church. And here's the other part that's not the same as when I was growing up necessarily, but we're going to be meeting up in a halal market to buy halal meat for a Muslim family as the church. And that's where we are in this moment. These young people they don't need to be a part of something that pushes somebody out. They have been well aware of the dangers of extremism and religious extremism. They are really looking for community that acts out its love.
Beautiful. Our neighbors are our neighbors, no matter where they worship. Thanks, Dina. All right, well, let's talk a little bit more about our younger generations. We're going to go through a series of slides now that share some information from studies and some tips on how we can make our own practices more adaptive and ready to welcome our younger generation. So let's start off with some numbers from a 2019 Pew study. We see that 84% of millennials value spiritual development. So they understand that they are spiritual beings and that needs cultivation. But not all of them are looking to church to do that. 71% think church might have something to offer them. I wish we could change that. I hope that in time we can change that and show them that church can help them actually develop their spiritual needs, not just their religious ones. And that distinction is one that we're going to have to get better about in church, I think. 50% of millennials think religion is very important to them. So this is, that's not my most exciting statistic. I wish that were higher. But it's nice that some do think it's very important to them. For a generation that we think of as largely unchurched, this is some good news. But overall, millennials don't really believe that the church has a positive impact, or I should say religion has positive impact on the world. They have seen scandal, they have seen war, they have seen they've seen abuse, and those headlines aren't just in the paper, they're stuck in our heads, and they're stuck in we can't ignore them. And our millennials and our Gen Z kids who are brought up in this aren't ignoring them either. They've seen the church do some pretty terrible things in the name of religion, and they're really skeptical of how they participate with that. That is part of our work to show the good work that we do. So we're going to go through a few slides now on how to create some strategies that make our church ready for younger members. And to do that, we're going to have to learn how we engage the wider community. This goes back to what Dina was saying earlier about millennials and Gen Z. They care about their neighbors. They care about acting locally. They want to see how the church is serving their neighbors. They might not use that language. They want to see how the church is serving community. So let's look at that. And our churches need to think about that. We need to think about how we increase volunteer engagement, because again, volunteerism is a gatekeeper. It's a threshold to learning more about the church, to opening up those moments of discipleship and evangelism. So our volunteer activities and creating more of them, advertising them more, is really going to be helpful for us. We're going to need to think about how we expect to raise money. Pledge campaigns, as important as they are to us and to TENS, we do need to adapt them and make them more user-friendly for our millennial and Gen Z donors. And finally, we need to talk about discipleship. We need to talk about how we encourage behaviors from an early place, or take people where they are and show them the good news so that they can share the good news. Discipleship is something that this is our work for these generations, to go out and make disciples. Never were those words more important, I think, than they are now. So the first thing we need to do is to show them results. Our Gen Xers, our millennials, our Gen Z, they're not motivated to give simply because they want to maintain the status quo. Stone and stained glass and wood churches are beautiful. We'll see more about that later. But they're not just interested in funding the budget. Tell us what you're doing with the money and show our results. Why is it that we hide our light under a bushel? Churches do such important work in the world. We feed, we clothe, we visit, we give encouragement, we heal divides and illness. We are in communities doing this work. We don't talk about it. We're so reserved. We need to share our numbers. How many people do you feed? How do you get out in the community? What are you doing to change the world? Our younger donors, our younger members want to see results. They want to know that their gifts, and their gifts at this age and income level, are really big deals, right? If they are making a gift to church, it is perhaps sacrificing something else. So we need to think about their giving really at this place as an intentional choice. They are not loaded with all this disposable income. They are making a conscious choice if they invest in us because they care about what we're doing. So let's really give them the confidence and the trust that their gifts require. So let's help them see how their giving directly impacts the community and the people that we say we're helping. Let's share those stories like Dina did. Sharing stories is so important. Let's share the numbers. Let's talk about those front and center. Use those signboards outside your church to talk about your programs, to talk about the things you're doing. Put out, and this is one of the things I say over and over, your community newspaper, the little circular that comes in your mailbox, whether you want it or not, they are hungry for content. If you take a picture and send them 300 words or 500 words about something your church is doing in the community, feeding people, tutoring kids, they'll run it. They'll run it right next to the coupons and the things that your community gets. And that's easy publicity. That's an easy way to share good results. And they are desperate. They don't have journalists on staff to write these articles. They depend on us to do our own work on this. And this is some public relations work that's an easy one for us to do. Dina's gonna preach to us.
So a lot of the information about what we're doing in the community can be shared, as Davey's saying, in papers. Instagram's going to be important for millennials and Gen Z. If you can pop a couple of cool pictures up there. Also, sermons really need to grab people. And young members that are tuning in either online or in person, they want engaging preaching. And so to talk about current events and issues and to be authentic. I said to Davey earlier, and I'll use a nicer way of saying it. These generations, millennials and Gen Z, have very good BS detectors. If you are preaching from the pulpit something that does not really jive with who you authentically are, they will know it. And they really value authenticity. So having a really authentic conversation from the pulpit about where you are with something and being a little vulnerable and even awkward can go a long way with these generations. They don't need it all tied up, right or wrong. That's not how they're thinking. They want authentic preaching. As we mentioned earlier, they really care about the environment, as do I. And so showing that in preaching and using examples about that from the pulpit can be really useful. There's a lot of books out there about self-care and getting enough rest and Sabbath. And friends, we know about these things. This is part of our religious tradition to talk about how we care for ourselves and our families. And then, when we do talk about the headlines, again, don't feel the need to have all the answers. These generations do not expect you to have all the answers, nor do they even want that, like maybe some other generations did. I think that what I'm seeing among millennials that are having children is that they are really hoping for faith formation that aligns with their values as a family. And they're not adverse to hearing sermons about money, that's part of how we live into our values. And they're going to get more, they're more open to talking about money than perhaps some other generations. And so to talk about our values as folks and to share with them examples from life and your own life that don't have it all figured out and leave it a little messy, that's going to be more attractive to these younger donors. Oh, I want to say one more thing, Davey, although I hope I didn't freeze. It felt like I froze there for a moment. One more thing I want to say about preaching is we came into the church, many of us, and the church offered us a place to identify as respectable citizens. And today, I think it's really probably more important for these younger generations that church be a place where everyone is deeply respected and valued, and respectability is much less important. So, things that wear to church are different now, and it's not about proving respectability. In fact, I think for my generation and on up, respectability in church, we have to be very careful it doesn't become something that we worship or something that we value more than inclusivity. So that's really a little cautionary tale there. I think that we can chase people away by being more focused on respectability than inclusivity. This group is going to care that all groups are respected more than we're all very respectable here.
I like that. That's a good distinction. I also wanted to go back to what you were saying about preaching about money. I want to remind us all that the prophet who taught us to preach talked about money more than almost any other topic. In fact, 40% of the parables in the Gospels are about money, stuff, possessions, and our attachments to them. If Jesus could talk about money 40% of the time, we can talk about money in church too. It's okay to do that, and we should feel ready to do that. All right, Dina, you're going to tell us about church architecture too, right? But you're on mute.
Yeah, there we go. Absolutely. So this is a really fun topic. And if you really want to start a fight in any church, start talking about what's the right thing architectural in a church. It's a great way to just kind of get everybody divided, or at least multiple camps about that. So I serve in 3 different worship spaces. One was built in 1834 and is that kind of early national architecture, very beautiful Union Chapel. One I serve in, I think it was built in the late 1800s, that's St. Paul's, and it's a traditional kind of longer chapel space with no side aisles, only a center aisle. And I serve a congregation that built a building in 2002 that's really a parish hall that is kind of made into a worship space with a nice altar area, but otherwise it's very much a parish hall. And so I'm really interested in how those spaces are attractive to newer and younger members. And what we know about church, I mean, there's something about walking into an old church where you smell that you're in church. And some of you know what I mean. It either has that lingering incense smell or the smell of wood, or maybe even a little damp, I'm not sure, damp paper, but there's a smell that we associate with church. For our younger generations, they appreciate some of the traditional architecture, as you can see from this 2014 study, more than some of us older folks think that they want screens. This is where we're learning that's not what they want. They want church to be church. And so some of that beautiful wood furnishing, some of those beautiful tapestry, paraments and hangings, altars that look like church, and candles really create a sense of sacred space for younger generations. There are screens everywhere in their lives. This can be a nice respite from a screen-focused world. Not that screens are bad or can't be used well. We just don't need to fall into that trap of thinking younger people need to have screens in church. It's not necessarily what the study shows. And the other thing, this is hard. If you're in a small church or a really large church, they like medium-sized congregation or buildings. So if there's not a lot you can do, except if you're in a really big space, you can maybe do what Epiphany Odenton in Maryland did. They took out their back pew section and put in round tables with umbrellas, even inside the church, to make like a cafe coffee space for after church for coffee hour. It's very much like a lovely social space, so that the pews area got a little more intimate instead of being too big. And so there are things you can do to take a really big space and make it feel more medium. It's very hard to take a little space and make it feel more medium. Maybe some of you have ideas about how to spill out and do that, or open all the doors and windows if you're in a warm climate. So I love this. I love when Davey pulls together these materials. This is part of what I'm learning. Select the altar image that is most appealing to you. Check this out. So the most appealing of these 4 images is the stained glass window, the third one in that kind of greenish color. This, by and large, was the most popular look. It reads right away symbolically as church space to people. And the next one is the sort of simple cross to its left, as another little darker, dimmer space, but with a very simple cross up in front of the congregation. I think the other two are also very beautiful, and especially the one that only got 19%, I think is really attractive and open. And yet those are not necessarily what's going to be most appealing, as you can see, to different groups of people. Davey, which was your favorite?
Yeah, well, I'm with you. I like the simple one, the one on the left. And but I'm not a millennial apparently, because the millennials liked the middle two most. And even as we were talking about this, the one on the left doesn't have a cross or a icon or anything that makes it look like this is a Christian space. It just has some architecture elements. So what this is saying, and you can see below each of those, it looks at all millennials. So this is a study for millennials on church architecture. Pick which one you like. And then it talks about churched, marginally churched, and unchurched. So you can see sort of, how these different demographics within millennials react to church architecture and what they find most interesting. And this goes back to Dina's point of, if we think we need to make it sleek and ultra modern and tech focused, our millennials are saying, actually tradition, this is one of the reasons we're going to come to church. We can get sleek in our classrooms or in a other venue, but church is church. I love it. Well, let's keep talking about tech. So this study was done by the Methodists, and it helps us understand that if you're going to have screens, and some churches are doing that, especially in the pandemic. I've noticed some Episcopal churches that were long-time holdouts against technology have run headlong into it. So if we're going to do it well. And the Methodists can commission some great studies on how to make your PowerPoint and your music match up. One of the things they noticed is that millennials and Gen Z will be hypercritical of your effort if the music and the slideshow are off, if it feels chunky. And so they've actually done a step-by-step. This is how you can make your technology match up. This is how you can create spaces that are effective and efficient, but also respectful. And what you don't want are people to say, this looks like a bad lecture. You want people to say, this feels like an authentic worship experience. So if you're gonna take away your hymnals and your bulletins and replace them with screens, do a little work, actually do a lot of work to test out what's going to work. Make sure your space is ready. Read this article and others like it, because it'll help you create the right technology for your space. Another thing that we really want to talk about is retention. And so we're moving away from tech, we're moving into some other things now in our presentation. The number one thing that when we are talking to millennials and Gen Z donors is that we want to make sure they understand that regular and consistent giving is a part of our plan. Now, technology makes this so easy. There's that toggle that says, make my gift recurring. And then you can say weekly, monthly, quarterly, annually, whatever you want. Online giving makes this opportunity seamless, painless. And so our younger generations already know this. But more than switching it on, we want people to understand that generosity is a discipline, that it is something that we cultivate. And so our churches, we need to do some work on intentional formation around generosity and the discipline or the practice of generosity. The more and the younger we can get people to commit to raising money and to making gifts to church will create lifetime habits. And these lifetime habits are things that the church is going to need to depend on as we dip and rise through our economic cycles, as we move through technology cycles, as whatever Gen Z will become and the generation that comes after it will begin to be active in the church. We need this touch point of regular giving and regular understanding of generosity. Dina, do you want to take us back into volunteers?
I do. So I think, part of how I was developed spiritually and in religious community was going on ministry trips, or we called them mission trips. Can you hear me? Uh-oh, can you hear me, Davey?
I hear you.
Oh, good. So one of the ways I was formed as a Jesus follower was on mission trips, we called them in the 80s. I now call them ministry experiences. There's so much that we know how to do in the church, and with young people, young adults included, and folks getting a little older and with their children, ministry experiences is where we get to really know people and make those relationships happen. One of the pieces that we can do is the follow-up after folks volunteer with us. Let's say they come in and work to fill up boxes for a food bank, to gather everyone afterwards and to really thank them, and then to debrief that experience, especially if they were interacting with clients who were receiving, to really talk and process, what was that like for you? What did you learn about yourself or our community? And to really share with one another the gleanings of that experience. And then one-on-one for those volunteers who are working alongside folks that don't worship with us, to say, if you ever want to come to worship, it's a great place to pray and be together. And it really strengthens me for this kind of work. So people make that, we've got to really put some connective tissue on the bones for people, that the Sunday worship experience strengthens the volunteering and making a difference in the community. But we must do some debriefing or invitational work around that. Is that me?
It's you.
Good. So, Verna Dozier published a really great book called The Dream of God. And I'm kind of ruining the end for some of you if you haven't read it. She says that Jesus didn't say, make really big, beautiful churches. I'm paraphrasing. He said, follow me. And so it's really important that when we are encouraging younger members to be generous, it's not just because we love the buildings for our own reasons. It's because we believe those buildings are serving a purpose in creating Jesus followers and shaping those followers for really rich and flourishing lives. And so to draw people in and disciple one another in Christ is really at the heart of what those buildings are doing, okay? So everything that we do to gather volunteers together, to invite people to give generously, to worship together in formation, is to create those relationships in which we are being formed as disciples and contributing to the formation of one another as disciples. And it's not like I have all the answers and am making these younger folks into disciples just like me. It's not cookie cutter, but rather every time a new person comes into the congregation, we sort of wait and see what are they, how are they changing us? Who are we now that they are here? How do we understand our role as disciples differently now that these new folks are here? Because we are changed every time new disciples join in the ministry. So that's something to remember. Through those relationships, we will all be discipled more fully, and so that we can draw others into the community.
So we need to remember, in thinking about how we incorporate younger people in community, that this is a generation, these are generations that are really comfortable with questions. As Dina said earlier, We don't have to have all the answers in preaching, in teaching, even in evangelism and in discipleship. What we need to do is make people feel comfortable asking questions. I love this about our church, and I love this about the way we are becoming church. So 11% of millennials say they do not believe in God, but many of them say maybe God exists, maybe not. So what we're understanding in that is that they're willing to imagine. Maybe, I don't have the answer yet. I've been living now 25 years, 30 years, and I'm still not certain if I have the answer, if there's a God or not. I've been living 50 years, and sometimes I wonder that same question. But what this is saying is that living into questions is very different for this generation than it might have been for others. Ambiguity is more of a comfortable place, if you can imagine such a thing. And we need to help people understand. So these are kids who grew up with godly play for Sunday school. I don't know if all of you are familiar with that Montessori-based Sunday school education program. We do it in my church now, and they're the kids who have been formed in it. One of the things they know is that all of the questions begin with, I wonder. And when they ask a question, the facilitator says back to them, I wonder. And it's this question and answer that we're always attuned to learning and being okay with not knowing all the answers, to seeking them together in community, to finding out together, to sharing the wisdom along the way. And so our younger generations live in this world. Our churches might need to start thinking more about this, like, let's talk about questions rather than articles of faith. Let's talk about some of the ways that we engage the really unanswerable questions in church with more comfort in question asking and how we engage that. I think often how a church engages questions says more about it than a church that has answers. And I think that this is a really important thing. As Dina said earlier, our younger generations have big BS detectors. They understand if we're feeding them a line, if we're just quoting from the card, if we're reading from the doctrine. They're much more interested in learning how to process that in a group. And this is one of the things that our church can give, I think.
Hey, Jess, how are you?
Thanks. So let's talk about diversity as well. So our millennials and our Gen Z are the most racially diverse generation. 43% of them are non-white. This is an American statistic. We're talking about America. So 43% are not white. When we are standing at the chancel behind the altar, are not reflecting the diversity that people are seeing in their lives, in their school, in their workplaces, then there is a disconnect. And it's one of those ways that church can begin to feel irrelevant or out of step. And so we need to raise up non-white leaders from our churches, from outside our churches, invite people in. It needs to be a very intentional, conscious choice for us to make certain that diversity takes more than just saying we'd like diverse candidates. It means going out and seeking them, making them feel welcome, inviting them to participate. Sometimes it's even more work than just saying it. We need to go out and do. So let's help make certain that our church reflects the diversity around us. Seek, recruit, raise up ministry candidates, raise up leaders, identify leadership in your own congregation that might need to be groomed or led into leadership. that are representative of the diversity around you. This isn't just for young people. We need to be diverse in all of who we are, our ethnicity, our identity, our ability, our age. We need to reflect the great diversity that our society is finally beginning to at least mention, talk about, showcase. So let's not be out of step. Let's be diverse as a church. I know that this is way easier to say than do, and our churches have a long way to go in this, but it all begins with intention. At your vestry, at your leadership, little decisions over and over and over again in favor of diversity will slowly move our ship into becoming a more diverse place. We need to do this. We need this and our younger generations are going to demand it. They're going to see us as out of step if we don't do some work on this. Finally, let's talk a little bit about optimism. We hear always a negative message. When you read the headlines, when you look around you, it's so often people sharing negative stories or a spin on a story that's depressing or skeptical. One of the things we have as church is the hope in what is to come, and is the hope that we are working in the kingdom of God, in the reign of God, to change the world now. We believe this as a people of God, as followers of Jesus. Our hope is our optimism, and we can help people by, I'm not suggesting that we be all rose-colored glasses and Pollyanna-ish, but that we need to think about what the hope for the world is and speak it into being, and then act it into being. Our optimism, our hope is one of the ways forward. We must learn to capture the hope of the New Jerusalem and use it to talk about the brilliant future that God has for us. This is really important. Dina, you had yesterday when we were talking a story about optimism that you wanted to share.
I do. I'm going to tell a story on myself, and because we're among friends and I'm modeling authenticity, I said to my spiritual director recently, I'm just kind of sad that nobody's coming to the 11:15 service, once we started getting back to our multiple services. And my spiritual director said, do they know that you think they are nobody? And so, boy, that caught me up short. And how we talk about one another, I've heard this from other people, nobody's coming, no children come. When we are, especially from the pulpit or in public documents or writing on the website, if ever we're complaining that nobody's here, that is the least likely way to get somebody here. Rather than saying, isn't it wonderful to be in a community with all 8 of you, even though there used to be 15, right? We can celebrate the 8 who were there. And I've got to be really careful about that as a leader in the community. We've got to really be hopeful. And I think it's even more sad if somebody says to me, nobody's at church today, and they're there. So now I can say, are you a nobody? You're not a nobody, you're somebody. So I think we've got to really relanguage and articulate a way of seeing that God is giving us what we need in the moment, and trust that instead of being so anxious about who's not.
Thank you, Dina. Totally. And thanks for being vulnerable with us and sharing your learning. I'm going to go quickly through our last few slides and make sure that we have some time at the end to ask and answer some questions. And again, you're going to get these slides. So if I go over something quickly, you can ask about it or rely on getting these in a minute. So let's talk a bit about politics. So I think we swung the pendulum away in our worry about partisan politics from talking about politics sometime in church and our pulpits. And I want to remind us that the church is very much a political institution. We care very much about what happens in the world. And one of the things that influences what's happening in the world is our politics. Certainly our younger members are attuned to what's happening in the world. And we can't all be marching in the street like these young people in this picture are, but there are lots of ways that we can advocate for positions that we care about as individuals, as a church, for the poor, for peace, for good decision-making, and without wading into partisan politics. We have to remember that we are a church that talks about overthrowing oppression, that we are a church that cares deeply about the poor being served. The rich are sent away empty, right? So we have to remember that we care deeply about these things as church and engage those issues as church. So local politics, our millennials, they remember that bumper sticker, think globally, act locally, and they are there with us. And so let's make certain that we as church advocate. I love sharing the Episcopal Public Policy Network with people in congregations who don't even know that the Episcopal Church has a public policy network. It's a website. You put your information in, and then every couple of weeks you get a great email that says, click this button to send a petition or to join the cause or to do whatever. It just helps us align on things that matter to us as Episcopalians. I want to talk a little bit more about technology and how we use it. In the Web 1.0, early web, we had these websites that just presented information. The revolution of Web 2.0 was user-generated data and engagement and social media. We're still often viewing our websites and our Facebook and our Instagram pages in that Web 1.0 way. We put information out there, and then we wonder why people might not be reacting to it. But have we asked them to react to it? When we post our sermon online, I love when congregations have a link to the sermon on their website, and maybe they then link to it on their Facebook page. Are we saying, what did you think of this? Or here are some thoughtful questions to ask. Things that engage conversation. If we're going to have a social media or an online presence, let's use it to foster more conversation. Our youngest members understand totally that that's the purpose of the internet, is to have conversation. You need to moderate those conversations. You'll get some people who might say things that you'd rather they not say on your church's Facebook page. You have tools as the moderator to delete comments or to, do what you need to do to make your community a safe place. But engaging conversation is so important when we do that on the web. Finally, I want to talk about some things that you should implement in your church to make certain that you have a giving program that encompasses all the ways that people can give. Charles earlier mentioned that we make certain we give people an opportunity to fill out a pledge card that says they're making a planned gift or that they have, talks about retirement accounts and how we can do that. Your diocese and certainly the Episcopal Church Foundation have pamphlets that you can order and have in the back when somebody says, I might like to give through stock this year. You have a way to give them that money, or I'd like to designate my gift through my IRA. You have a way for them to do that. Simple information prepared ahead will help people who want to make gifts in ways that aren't checks and cash and bank transfers possible to do that. If you haven't yet adopted some kind of online giving strategy, an online giving platform, please check out our earlier webinars from last year. We did one in 2020 and another one in 2021, where we went through many of the common giving platforms, showed you what was good about them, compared the costs on them for you so that you could make an intelligent decision, an informed decision on what might work for your community. Please adopt some online giving platforms so that your youngest donors, and let's just say that since the pandemic, 75% of people aged 66 and above have made gifts online, right? They had to learn how to continue to support their nonprofit in their church when they weren't in church writing checks. So they've adopted this, they've adapted. Let's keep that trend going. I have one more slide to share before I open it up to conversations, and that's just our theme for this year. I want you all to know that we are, as we do every year, creating an annual pledge campaign that follows the theme. And this year's theme, which we decided at our amazing board retreat, is more than enough. And so all of the materials that are being developed right now, they're all being translated into Spanish. So they'll be up by probably the end of May or the beginning of June. You'll be able to use those. So they all hang on the theme. I know, and I see that we have a guest with us, Stephen from Los Angeles, who has written this year's hymn to be used at Pledge Campaign. Stephen, do you want to say a couple words about the hymn that you've written for TENS users on this theme?
Thanks, Debbie. I certainly hope that people will use it and enjoy it. I think it speaks to the root of the theme. We're in an age of uncertainty, but yet there really is more than enough if we trust God to lead us.
Stephen, I appreciate that for the last 3 years, you've written us custom hymns. Who else has a custom hymn writer on hand to create these beautiful resources? You can find them in the liturgical resources. And when our whole campaign is ready for download, you'll be able to download them as well. So Stephen, you are a gift to us and to the church. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and bring us into the big conversation so that you can ask any questions you might have in the few minutes that we have remaining. Is there an experience you have of welcoming younger generations that you'd like to share with us? Is there a question you had on anything Dina and I shared? I know we sent a lot of information at you this morning. You can use the raise hand function, and then we can call on you.
Davey, while people are thinking about raising their hand and finding that, I want to share a more than enough story from Thursday night, if that's all right. Thursday night, we had a potluck at church, our first after the pandemic, and there was no main course. There were salads and desserts, but nobody brought a main course. And so one millennial, actually Gen Z, ran out to get pizza because he knew how to manage all that and do that for us. So it turned into a pizza potluck. And yet for me, it was more than enough because at one point I looked and saw my 16-year-old daughter of her own volition. She was going to skip the social part and work on homework, but of her own volition, went over and sat with a member who's in her 70s named Betsy, and they were laughing and talking with each other and reconnecting. And that was more than enough. It wasn't about the food. It was all about the fellowship. And similarly, I had a parent with 3 young children tell me that she really enjoyed visiting St. Paul's, and what she's missing as a mom is being in worship. She doesn't need Sunday school to come back yet. She just wants to bring her kids to worship with different generations. So many of us have that to offer, which is indeed more than enough.
I love it. Charles, I see you've got your hand up.
Just a comment. I believe the 6 key words are thank you, thank you, thank you, as Dina said. And then it's relationships. I've raised millions of dollars based on that principle. Also, I believe Sunday offering is a time to tell the good news of stewardship, connecting people's giving week by week with the good things your church is doing. Not just your church, but your diocese, the Episcopal Relief and Development, all kinds of great things that you're offering on Sunday makes a difference. And I believe no one ever left the church because they felt thanked and appreciated. Okay, so we want everybody in your congregation, and whether they're 80 years old or 8 years old, to feel thanked and appreciated because they're making a difference in changing the world.
Thanks, Charles. Does anybody else have a question or a story of welcoming millennials or Gen Z that they'd like to share with us? We've filled up your hearts and your minds with a lot of information on a Saturday, so I really appreciate it. Thanks all for the great comments that are coming into the chat. We're so glad that this webinar was helpful. If you like it, we have 5 more this year that you can sign up for. Some of them are free, some of them aren't. So sign up for those. You can find them all. I will send the link out when we put out our email today. But you can, May through October, we've got more webinars coming at you to help teach you this stuff. I will send you an email all this afternoon with the recording and the slides so that you can have these and share them with everyone. We really, really want you to get this information out. Well, we really appreciate your time, your attention, your great feedback. Look for an email from us. Sign up for more webinars. We'll also have a little link to a survey. You can tell us how this was for you, what you might like to see in the future. We take your survey results really seriously. And when we meet for our retreat in September, we'll take a look at the webinars that we need to create for next year based on what you've all told us. So I really, really appreciate all that you give us and your attention today. With that, I release you to your Saturdays. Have a beautiful, powerful, wonderful Holy Week and a most glorious Easter. Thank you, friends. Thanks, Dina. Wonderful to work with you.
And it's wonderful to work with you again, Davey. I've learned so much. I think we can all apply this in all areas of our lives, not just around giving, but with different generations. So thank you for this good
Really.
work.
All right, friends.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.